Hey, welcome back. Dave DeBow here, and today we're going to be talking about, can I buy an investment property while renting? I hope so, because I've done that several times myself. All right, so on today's video, we're going to be looking at, should you be buying rental properties while you are a renter? Is that something you should even be doing? I'm going to show you three reasons why people actually do that. And I'm going to share my story myself of how I've been in that situation 2 times and show you some solutions if you'd rather be an investor who's also living in your own property. That's what we're talking about here today. So the first question is, can you be a renter and a real estate investor at the same time? Well, yes, you can. There's no law against it. I guess the real question is, should you be doing that? Is that something that you want to do, or is that something that you have to do? And we'll take a look at all of these situations. First things first, let's look at 3 different reasons why people are real estate investors and renters at the same time. And the first reason is because of personal financial challenges. This could come from various challenges. It could be bankruptcy, a recent bankruptcy. That means you're not going to qualify for financing. It could be your current financial situation. You don't have enough capital to buy your own property. It could be that you've gone through a divorce and you're tight for cash. It could be that you've lost your job and you don't qualify for financing that way either. There's all sorts of different reasons why people are renting and wanting to invest in real estate at the same time. One of my examples, because I've been in this situation a few times, is when I went through a divorce. So I got divorced and I got booted out of my house, which now became my ex's house. And I had to rent for a while. I mean, that's just normal. And the way it was between the divorce situation, the fact that I now had to pay spousal support and child support and all this kind of stuff, I didn't qualify for financing to buy my own property. But I didn't want to let that shit slow me down. So I still went out and I invested in multifamily properties with investor partners. So at that time, I owned a 54-unit apartment building out of province, out of state, and I was renting myself. It seemed a little bit weird, but it was completely doable. So that's one of the situations that might come up, that a person kind of has to be renting while they are investing, as they just don't qualify for financing. My good friend Ken was in a similar situation. He actually had quite a significant portfolio built up, and then he quit his job, became self-employed for a while, and quite frankly, the big banks hate that when it comes to financing you for your own personal residence. So even though Ken had a big portfolio, he couldn't qualify with a bank to get his own mortgage. It's really, really strange how that worked. He ended up getting creative and getting that financing anyhow, but he wasn't able to do it the traditional way. Now, the second reason some people prefer to rent while they're investing in real estate is they don't want to be tied down in the particular place where they're living. So perhaps they're living one place and they're investing somewhere else, or they're in a place temporarily due to work or whatever else is going on in their life, and they just don't want to set roots down in that particular spot. So they prefer to rent, keep things simple, and keep doing their real estate investing business on the side. It doesn't really matter that they don't own their own property. They just prefer it because they don't want to live there permanently. And the third reason some people prefer to rent instead of buying their own place and still invest in real estate at the same time is they don't think where they live that it makes sense to buy a personal residence. So this is usually the case if they feel like the single-family home housing market is just too hot, it's overpriced, and they'd rather rent and wait for things to kind of level out a little bit. So this is the case my good friend July Ono was in a few years ago. She had a portfolio of 500 rental units. She had a number of apartment buildings, but she still chose to rent where she was living because she didn't want to spend the big bucks to buy a house. So that was her choice, and she and her husband just rented for a couple of years until they found the right opportunity for them to buy their own personal residence. So that's a matter of choice. Okay, so there were a few different reasons why people choose or they have to rent while they're investing in real estate. And if you're looking for ways to get out of that situation, especially if you're in that first situation because due to finances you can't afford or you can't qualify to get your own personal residence, then we've got some solutions here for you. And the first one I want to share with you is house hacking. And house hacking is basically buying a property, in this case usually a small multifamily property, so it could be a duplex, a triplex, a fourplex, and you live in one of the units and you rent the other ones out. So what is the big benefit of doing this? Well, because it's your personal residence, you can come up with a much smaller down payment, as little as 5% down, and get into this property. And then, in addition to your own personal qualification for the mortgage, some of the rent that's coming in from the rental units is going to help you to qualify to purchase that property. So the property is helping you to qualify to buy it. So that's a really good way to own your own home, build up your rental portfolio at the same time, and keep doing whatever it is that you're doing with real estate investing, is to house hack. The second way to get into a property, if you can't quite qualify, is to do something creative. And that is to get owner financing on a deal, or do a rent-to-own deal to get into your own personal residence. So this reminds me of my situation way back. I lived outside of Canada for a number of years, moved back in 2003, and I was starting all over again from scratch. I didn't have bad credit, I had zero credit. I'd been gone for about 14 years. I had zero credit rating at the time, so I had to build that up from scratch. Also, I didn't have a lot of cash. I'd had a business where I was living, and I hadn't been able to sell that business, so I didn't have that much cash. And because I didn't have credit, there's no way that a bank was going to qualify me for a mortgage. Plus, I wasn't employed. I came back to Canada and I became self-employed. And the big banks tend to hate us self-employed folks until you've got a really good track record going. So my first couple of years of real estate investing, I was a renter, and I still did 18 deals in 18 months, even though I was renting where I lived. But here's what I did to get into a property creatively. I found a property seller, it was actually a friend of the family, who had his property on the market for a number of months and hadn't been able to sell it, even though it was a fairly strong sales market at that time. So this guy was in a situation where he had already purchased the other house where his family was going to be living. They had moved in, and now they had this vacant property that he was still paying the mortgage on, just eating up his cash flow. So he had to pay for the new property, he had to pay for the old property. It was really biting him pretty hard. So he was becoming very, very motivated. So we came up with a creative deal where by that time, the bank was at least willing to look at me, but they weren't willing to completely finance me. They wouldn't let me get in with 5% down. They wanted me to have 20% down to get into that property. And at the time, I didn't have the cash. So what I did is I got creative with the seller. I said, hey, I'll buy the property from you if you'll carry a second mortgage on this property. At that time, the bank agreed to that. So I was able to get in with about 5% down, and the bank financed 80% of it, and the seller financed 15% of it. So every month I was making the first mortgage payments to the bank and the second mortgage payments to the seller, and we did that for a few years until I built up my credit and I could refinance it and get the seller bought out at that time. So that was the way that I got into our first home, kind of creatively. And the third way that you can get into your own home, even if you're an active real estate investor and you can't quite qualify, is to do some sort of a joint venture with somebody to buy your house. So the most common way I've seen people do this is to do a rent-to-own kind of a deal. So they find somebody who can qualify for a mortgage, who has some money for the down payment, perhaps you've got some of the money for the down payment, and you get them to buy the house for you. So it's actually in their name and the mortgage is in their name, but you do a lease with an option to purchase agreement with them, which means that you're going to be renting the property from them with the option to purchase it 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road once you've got all your ducks in a line and you qualify for a mortgage. So this is a great way to get into a property today that you really like and get a good return for the investor partner that's helping you out with this and be able to buy it at a fixed price just a few years down the road while you're building up your credit and you're building up your down payment in installments. So that's the third way you can get into a property that way. Now, if you're looking at ways to scale your portfolio, whether you're renting or you're not, you're going to have to look at bringing on investor partners or joint venture partners. We talked a little bit about this in this video. If you want a crash course on how to do that, then here's what you need to do. Grab my book. It's called Money Partner Formula. You can get a free copy by clicking on the link in the description below, or just go to investorattractionbook.com.